Today's episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies, a monitoring resource for parents who are looking to protect their children from online harms like grooming. I'm so grateful that parents of today have safer devices from Bark that makes our kids' entire online experience so much more safe. Let's get into this interview about grooming with Anna Sonoda. So welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have Anna Sonoda, who is a licensed clinical social worker, a mom of 5, and related to our discussion today, Anna's most significant work was as a cognitive behavioral therapist for convicted sex offenders. So we'll get into all of that, but thank you so much for being here, Anna.
Thank you for having me, Nikki. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. It's so needed. I keep coming across stories of kids getting groomed across, right? I mean, I focus on social media and gaming platforms, and a lot of it's happening there. And I hope that you'll be able to educate parents on all the things around grooming. But before we do that, can you tell me what got you into this specific line of work?
I have my master's in social work, which is a profession that you can go into many directions. And when you're training to get your degree, you have to get placed in an environment where you get the opportunity to work with the public. And we had lots of opportunities, for example, working with kids or in school systems or at food banks or in shelters. And one of the options was a cognitive behavioral therapy placement location for convicted sex offenders. And at the time, I was very curious about possibly going into marital therapy or couples counseling and thought, well, intimacy and issues related to intimacy will come up again and again. So if I can handle content that's going to come out at the extreme end, or so I thought, then dealing with your average everyday couple is probably going to be a walk in the park. What I didn't quite realize at that time for the year that I was placed there and for several years afterward is that experience would have an indelible mark on me as a person, on the decisions I make as a mom, as a parent, certain choices I make inside of our home and outside of our home. And I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to have had that clinical work and now to be in a place in my life where I can share that message with other parents, because we have done it. We've gone about educating parents about grooming and sex offenders all wrong. And what we need to do is a complete 180 from what we were originally taught. And probably you and I can relate to this, that we were taught stranger danger. And we really need to get back to figuring out that it's not actually stranger danger at all. It's strange behavior from people who are known and trusted to us as caregivers and kids.
Wow. Okay. Can you share any of those early experiences with us? Something that really sticks with you when you were in that work?
Well, I think the thing that was remarkable is that time and time again, I would be given a chart that would say, oh, the crime is X. And then we would spend weeks and months together counseling on a weekly basis. And I would learn more about cases that were never reported, that were never prosecuted, and that this individual is not serving time for. And I think what is a misconception out there is, and it was a misconception of mine as well, was that most crimes against children, especially sexual crimes, heinous crimes, most are reported and most get processed through the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We have more than 70% that are never reported. And my clinical experience showed me firsthand that these individuals, although they were charged for a crime against a child, they were not charged to the full extent of all the crimes they had committed to children. And that really stayed with me as a person. And certainly now as a mom of 5, I experience that reminder every day that we're not just looking out for one type of person, because predators could be anyone. They could be everywhere, but they're not everyone. And so they stand out through their behavior. And if we could just educate parents on what is the behavior that sets them apart so that we can put ourselves and our children and our families in a better position to protect them, detect grooming if it happens, and then reject those efforts.
Okay.
Because grooming is an interruptible process, which I know we'll get into as we talk more.
Okay. So let's definitely get into the detection piece. But first, I want to back up and just talk generally about what is grooming. And for parents, this is tough stuff. And it's often, I think, a topic that parents avoid and think, not my kid. That's not going to happen in my family. And I think we are learning especially with all the online harms that our kids are getting access to at early ages, that we need to address these things early and often. And that takes educating parents. So can you share what is your definition of grooming?
Yes, I'm so happy to be having this conversation because we've been explaining it in a way that's really confusing. And my effort is to educate people on grooming so that they understand what it is, so that they can recognize it.
Great.
So grooming is a perverse form of courtship that sexual predators use to gain access and build trust with caregivers and other adults around that child. It is a process of selection, of intent, and it is incremental. So not all children will be groomed, but even if grooming begins, it does not have to result in childhood sexual abuse because the process is observable when you know what to look for. And there are some hallmarks that we'll certainly talk about as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How prevalent is this in today's society?
We do not have an accurate statistic on just how prevalent this is.
Yeah.
What we do know is that because the majority of child sex abuse cases are never reported, a lot of people might rely on the sex offender registry and they might think, well, I checked the sex offender registry before I moved into my neighborhood or before I picked a daycare center, etc. But unfortunately, a sex offender registry is catching less than 15% of the total crimes that are committed against children. So what I want people to recognize is that we should not be paranoid about everybody, but we should be prepared to know what to look for because it's that adult who goes out of their way to spend time with kids, to put themselves in positions around children. And I know what to look for. And I really want other parents to know what to look for because as we've already talked about, I'm a mom of 5. I have to rely on other adults all the time. I have to rely on other adults at schools. I have to rely on other adults in caretaking my children. And if I stayed in a position of paranoia or fear at all times, I would be a nutcase.
Yeah.
And instead, what we have to do is we have to set up policies in place so that we can keep our kids safe, keep ourselves sane, but also be prepared. And acknowledging that if we feel something that feels off, if we notice something that feels off, we're going to change course. So much of my behaviors as a parent are about who we are as a family. I'll give you a silly example.
Sure.
Our kids wash their hands before meals. Now, do I know that my kids' hands are dirty before they eat? No, I don't know that. I could probably guess that they are.
Right.
But if we had a neighbor or another friend come and join us for dinner, that child would also wash their hands before dinner because it's not who that child is or who that adult, I don't mandate it for the adults, but it's because of who we are that we wash our hands before meals. And the same is true for other policies regarding tech or technology or devices. It's not necessarily about somebody is beyond expectation or beyond the rules. We just have blanket rules because that's what keeps our family safe and that's our family standard.
Okay. I can't wait to learn about some of those policies. That'll be really helpful. But let's first get to, you mentioned selection. And can you give us insight on how predators are selecting children to groom?
Yes. So when we think about this, one of the things I want to make sure that we talk about is that grooming can be easily described by the 4 F's. So there's flattery, there's favoritism, there's forbidden fruits, and there's fear. And you'll notice when we talked a few minutes ago about grooming being described as a perverse form of courtship. Well, courtship always starts off sweet. And grooming, similarly, always starts off sweet. So you notice that the first F is flattery. So that could be if I'm a kid online, that could be a compliment. That could be somebody liking my picture. It could be somebody following me. It could be somebody trying to request a photograph or request more contact with me. If it's in person, it could be that the coach or that the teacher or an activities director says, wow, you are so talented. I've never taught a kid like you, or I've never had a player on my team as proficient as you are. And this rolls towards the family and the caregivers as well. And I'm sure you can assume why. Why would a potential predator want to flatter me as a caregiver or you as a caregiver?
To learn information about us or to
get information and to lower our guard.
Right.
Because I'm not leaving my child with strangers. Don't be silly. I'm a human, so I make mistakes, but I'm a well-intentioned mom most of the time.
Yeah.
Even among all my foibles. But I am going to trust and believe in somebody who believes that I am, or that my family is upstanding and praises that. So when you think about the online world that many kids are spending a lot of time on, and even caregivers and parents are spending time on, this is ripe for the taking from a predator or potential predator's perspective, because it thrives on flattery. It thrives on giving attention, and positive attention is a vulnerability to a lot of children these days, whether because they're unsupervised online or they're just having more screen time than expected. So these are things that we need to look out for as caregivers and parents, because flattery is and can be very intoxicating, even to us.
Yeah. Well, social media kind of automates that process, right? They can give a virtual like or heart, and that flattery piece makes it easy for them.
It certainly does. And then when you think about that second stage of grooming, which is favoritism, that's all about singling out that one child. So I can single out a child if I'm a potential predator from their peers by saying, if it's in person, for example, I could identify one of my players or one of the kids participating in my class and single them out and say, you are so special. You are, somebody that I've never come in contact with the likes of a kid like you. And I want to spend time with you. You're so special to me. So isolating that child from their peer group, separating them from that sense of, oh, well, I'm part of this pack. I'm part of this team, makes it even easier for that child to feel the sense of getting more attention, that sense of being special, which, let's be honest, all children want to feel special. And we have a first place seat in the lives of our children to give them that sense of specialness. So when I think about the way that I greet my kids when I pick them up, do I light up when they come around the corner or get in the car? Or do I say, get in, throw your bag in, let's move it. We got to get on to the next thing. So we have opportunities throughout our day, whether we are with our kids all the time or whether somebody else is a primary caregiver, whatever the situation might be, these interactions that we have with our children can be pivotal in making them have a sense of, I'm special in this house. I get attention in this house when I ask for it, when I need it. And there's space for me and my voice inside this home.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you. And then what was the third?
So the third F is forbidden fruits.
Right.
This is where, and this occurs online and in person, this is where a potential predator will do things like let a kid cuss, give a kid vaping or cigarettes or alcohol, or expose them to pornography, giving them ways to break your rules or my rules as a caregiver. And the important part about this is that when a child breaks inherent rules from the family that they grow up in or the caregivers that they are currently living with, that creates isolation. Because again, a hallmark of predators is that they need to isolate potential prey. So they do it first in that second stage when expressing favoritism towards one child, separating them from their peers. So maybe I don't feel like I can go to my friend and say, well, this is actually what happened after practice, because maybe those other kids think, well, you're getting special attention and Now we're snubbing you, for example.
Yeah.
But in that forbidden fruit stage, it's so critical because that's where a potential predator is building guilt and shame in a potential victim and reaffirming that you can trust me. I let you do cool things. I'll let you see the R-rated movie, even though we told your mom we were going to go see a G-rated movie, for example. And then that builds and reinforces this sense of silence. And again, we have to hand it to predators, right? Because they're capitalizing on a developmental stage that is very appropriately testing our boundaries and testing those expectations and saying, well, maybe I don't believe everything that my family believes. Maybe I want to believe my own things. And potential predators can sometimes show up at just the right time and say, you know what? Everybody else is treating you like a kid, but I know you're so mature. I know you can handle this. I know that you want to explore these things. So I'm going to make those things available to you.
Wow. Okay. And one thing I learned from Harrison Haynes, so that interview for listeners is available now, and he shares his experience being groomed as an early teen. But one thing I learned from him is that he didn't know that it was bad. He didn't know that it was wrong what was being shared with him. So I think, and especially if you have an adult introducing things to a child and telling them that this is safe for them or making them feel safe around it, it can be hard for a child to differentiate, right?
And I'm really glad you brought that up because potential predators are going to use a child's naive mindset or lack of exposure, whether it's to body parts, names of body parts, sexual identity, sexual knowledge in general, and might say, well, this is what people do when they care about other people. I care about you. I'm here for you. I give you attention. We have a special bond. We're friends. We're connected. The rate at which individuals can, create and develop bonds with kids online is lightning fast. In person, it takes a lot longer to establish those bonds. But if I'm on a gaming site or if I'm in a live stream platform and I'm talking to somebody, all we need to do is come up with, what are some connections we have? Oh, well, I'm into cars. Oh, well, you're into cars. Great. Well, it's very easy to impress children. And we have to remember we're looking at this situation with the lens of adults, but we have to remember that childlike mind that thinks, wow, this person is showing me attention. They're showing me kindness and they're sweet. Remember, there's been no violence. There's been no threatening. Nothing bad has actually happened. And I'm so glad you brought up Harrison's experience because you're absolutely right that using a child who may not have the knowledge or those embedded understandings that sexual material is never, ever appropriate for children under the age of 18, if that point hasn't been starkly addressed, or if a child is maybe curious because they are developmentally curious at that stage, then that can be used against them, which in turn builds shame and guilt and probably deters them from coming to caregivers and saying, this is the situation I'm in. This is what's happened, because they feel personally responsible. And we all know the last thing that they should feel is personally responsible. The only person responsible at any time when it comes to child sexual abuse is the predator. Unfortunately, children think with a child's mind. So we have to be even more attentive and aware.
And I want to get to the fourth F in a second, but when it comes to the sexual content, I mean, average age of kids seeing pornography is like 9 or 10 years old, and they're seeing it on school-issued devices. They're just signing up for social media and getting flooded with sexual material. So they're in their child mind, that's normal and that's what I should be seeing because this platform is serving it to me, and all the kids are also looking at it and showing me in class. And you think a child's going to see that and think, oh, I'm going to tell my parent because that's inappropriate. But I think we need to realize that it's more normalized for them than it ever was for us at those ages. So tell us about the fourth F.
So when we're thinking about the fourth F, that's when fear really takes hold. So that's when the individual will say, do you really want to lose me? Do you want to end this relationship? Do you want me to tell your parents what you've been doing? Do you want me to tell your friend list? I have all your contacts. Remember that friend that was a friend of a friend? That is the way we got in touch with each other in the first place. I'm going to blast the gaming site. I'm going to make sure that this picture or this content or your comments gets shared with other people. Mm-hmm. And again, just in the same way, it's very easy to flatter or impress children. It's also very strikingly easy to threaten them in ways that when an adult looks at it, you think, gosh, well, you know better than to believe somebody online who says that. But this works. And in person, when we get to stage 4, that fear stage, it might be a parent's boyfriend saying, for example, well, mom's going to lose her job if you speak up. You really don't want grandpa to be locked away, do you? I really care about you. And as you grow up a little bit, we could be together because I care about you. I mean, the thing we have to remember about potential predators is that they're serial liars, and they will say anything that they need to get what it is that they want or to progress through to the next stage. And many kids feel like, okay, well, we've gone this far. Like, I can't turn back now because I've already made this one mistake. And unfortunately, the thing that we need to be reminding our children of is no matter how deep into a problem you are, you can always pause the game, pause the conversation, pause the situation, come find us. If we're not there with you, who are the other adults that are in your space? At school, let's identify at least 1 or 2 people you can go to. When you're at grandma's house or nana's house or a babysitter's house or whatever the situation might be. Because it's really key that kids know we're not always with them. We can't always keep them safe, but they have the opportunity to exit, right? You can exit a game. You can shut it down. You can pause it, and you can come find a caring adult so that we can brainstorm the situation together, because at no time are you ever alone in your problems, whether they're problems at school, problems with friends, or problems in the virtual world. We're always the cornerstone for your safety and your well-being.
And one thing I've learned is don't freak out. Take a deep breath, because if they feel like they're in trouble by sharing this with you, even if they've done something wrong in the situation, we have to be calm in our reaction and loving and be their safe space so that they trust that they can continue coming to you, right?
Right. And if we were the ones to give them permission in the first place to use these devices, then their immediate thought is, if I tell my parents that something nefarious or bad is going on online, the first thing they're going to do is take away this device. So children's first inclination when these things happen, when they run into being sexually exploited online, which is about 78% of kids, their first decision is to block it. So these individuals actually don't get prosecuted. We don't take the devices to police stations, etc. The kids just ignore them and block them, which I suppose as a defense mechanism is useful. However, when it comes to keeping your kids safe online or my kids safe online, what we need to do is a better job of clearing out those individuals who do have bad intentions when they get on, whether it's websites or messaging apps or gaming platforms to interface with minors.
Okay. I can't help but wonder, like, who are these people, these predators that, thinking about the process of it, it's so horrible. Are these people that generally were abused growing up themselves? Or do they have mental health disorders? Like, what, do we have any statistics on what type of people are doing this to kids?
Well, I think it's a common myth that people who were abused become abusers.
Okay.
If that statistic held up, then we would have more female sex offenders than we do. And most sex offenders are male. A great resource for your audience is the Association of the Treatment of Sexual Offenders, Sexual Abusers, actually, which is atsa.org, atsa.org. And they are a wonderful resource for continuing education, for research, and they're coming out with the updated research on youth offenders, because the highest growing group of sex offenders right now are adolescent children, as you may imagine, with the advent of devices in their pockets, etc.
Yep.
So that is a wonderful place to start. What I can tell you from my clinical experience in the room with offenders was that most of them had challenging or strange household environments. A lot of prevalence of domestic violence, a lot of prevalence of disordered behaviors, not necessarily sexual behaviors in nature, but strange behaviors. But unfortunately, what we all realize is we can't go across the world and change people's homes or their home life or the situations inside their homes. We can do the best we can. But in addition to learning why sexual predators become sexual predators, our main focus needs to be on how do they groom and how do they abuse?
Yeah.
Because that's really going to be the piece that helps prevent kids from going through this life-altering, potentially traumatic experience.
Are there specific characteristics in children who are most at risk?
So I think one of the things, if we wanted to focus in on online behaviors and online vulnerabilities, the sexual predators are looking for things like, what is your age? What is your gender? What is your username? You know, if the username is sexual in any nature, that might be an invitation for a potential predator.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about how the grooming process is selective. So if I present myself as, if I'm a 12-year-old girl and my user handle is pussycat, 365, then a potential predator might pick that profile to send a cold solicitation for nude images compared to one that said, book lover 1802, for example.
Yeah.
So potential predators are looking out for, what is your username? What's your email? What information can I gather from you? What potential location is available on you? What are your interests? What are you into? What are you excited about? Because again, predators are keen observers of children and their vulnerabilities. So if a child is part of, let's say, a group for families going through a severe illness of a sibling, for example, a potential predator might use that information so that they can swoop in and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about your ill brother. I'd be more than happy to talk to you because you're so special and you're so beautiful. I looked at the picture of you. Why don't you send me a message and we can go over to WhatsApp and talk over there about how hard this has been for you. You can talk to me. Because one of the pieces I think is important that we talk about when it comes to the hallmarks of potential predators is that they use the seesaw principle, which is when we use a seesaw, we should ideally have two equally balanced people on either side. So that's like an ideal relationship. One person on one side, one person on the other side. It's a give and take on both sides. Potential predators are going to do one of two things when we think about the seesaw principle. They're either going to elevate the child to relate to them as an adult, therefore talking about things like emotional problems, relational problems, financial problems, employment woes, etc., sexual material, or they're going to do the opposite. They're going to lower themselves to imitate or be relatable to youth. So they may be on gaming sites that other minors are on. They might speak like the youth do. They might use vernacular, or they might find themselves in a position where their interests align with more minor interests rather than a normal adult who you would think, oh, well, you have interests around your kids or you follow your teams or something like that, but you're not actually doing that for your own enjoyment or your own pleasure. I don't know if that difference makes sense the way
It
that I
does.
explained it.
Totally does. Yeah.
Okay.
And to cover this quickly, I hear a lot of stories of grooming from Discord, which is a chatting app that kids use while they're gaming, or on the gaming platforms themselves, and then also on social media platforms or any encrypted messaging app like Telegram or WhatsApp. Is there any other platforms that parents need to be aware of where kids are getting targeted?
I have little lists, and I'm more than happy to send you the lists I have, so you can put it in the show notes if that's easier.
Yeah.
I can read them out to you, but I don't want to waste your time with that unless you think that's beneficial.
I think those are the major ones, though, that I mentioned. Is there any other top platforms?
I think Snapchat, I think we have to also watch out for some of these dating apps that,
Okay.
the majority of kids are they're automatically starting off on a lie. They're automatically pitching themselves as being older online.
Okay.
There's a lot about, you know, you're not even supposed to be on social media until you're 13. Well, kids are using secrecy and misinformation to begin with to even get on those platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's normalized that we meet people for relations and connection and romance online, that's trickling down to youth. So we need to be conscientious of platforms that are encouraging relationships and connection without those guardrails, especially without the supervision or vetting their age or their stage of life in appropriate ways.
Okay, thank you. And that would be all social media platforms because none of them have good age verification at this point. But yeah, Anna has an exhaustive list of platforms that I guess where people are targeting kids that we can include in the episode notes. And there's the anonymity piece, but with Snapchat, I have a hang up with the fact that they force users to create Bitmojis, which is like cartoon characters that makes them look super innocent. Do you feel like that's dangerous for children to not see what someone actually looks like, or give them the option to even share their real photo in their profile picture?
I think all of it is awful.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
I think, it sort of sounds like, making a gimmick out of your face and who you are and turning yourself into an avatar. But that's also the world that these kids are growing up in. I read a shocking statistic in preparation for coming in to have this conversation today about children and what's normal to them. One out of four adolescents today thinks it's normal to send a nude image of themselves via online platforms, even when they know it's an adult on the other side.
Oh my God.
And when we think in terms of what was normal for us, or, we cannot close Pandora's box. So what we need to do is we need to empower parents to use the resources at their disposal to get educated and to remember that if you're going to give permission to devices or access, that it's our obligation to have some really, really key conversations again and again and again. We don't just get to have it once. It's sort of like the sex talk. You start at the youngest age and it builds and evolves as you go. One of the things I would also like to say that hasn't come up just yet is that predators run on gas. Grooming, access, and space. And when we learn what grooming is, we also can recognize then that our responsibility is to alter or assess their access and their space. And many times parents misunderstand that even though my child is in my home or they're in my car, they are inherently safe. If they're using a device that is open to the world, they are inherently vulnerable. And we need to consider, just like we consider, would I let you walk down the street to the store by yourself? Would I let you walk home from school by yourself? Home from the bus stop by yourself? We also need to be considering what sort of space are we allowing our children to enter when they go into these online environments? Because that is inherent access that can be provided or it can be removed. Right. And so if you have any inclination or any indication that grooming may have begun or may be happening online, our first responsibility is to alter access and space so that we can get more information and figure out what the appropriate next steps might be.
Okay. So a few more questions, and let's keep talking about protection. So how can we protect our children from this happening to them? And I know that's also comes with preparing them and having conversations, but where do you want to start with protection?
So I think when we think about protection, we need to think about the 3 P's of protection.
Okay.
We need to think about permission. The first P is permission. So as the gatekeeper of my children, I grant permission in person to the people that they're going to spend time with, and as well as online. So is there permission for the device? Are there parameters around permission for downloading apps, for engaging in certain websites, certain platforms, and having a conversation out loud about why or why not permission is being granted or denied for that certain platform, that certain space, and allowing your child to maybe even pitch a case for themselves about, well, you've actually got this all wrong. This is not a one-sided discussion. We should really be trying to educate our kids and bring them into the conversation whenever possible. The second P of our 3 Ps is public. We should have use of devices in public spaces.
Love it.
So our child's not going up to the bedroom. Do you know that the majority of child exploitation happens after? Do you know what hour it happens after?
I'm going to say 10 p.m.
11 p.m. Do you know what's happening at 11 p.m. in my house?
Sleeping. Everyone should be sleeping.
I am fast asleep. So we need to have public usage only. That means I can see your screen. And unfortunately, game makers are getting, when we think about that principle of isolation that we talked about a little while ago, gaming consoles are becoming more and more isolated. They're becoming smaller. Children are wearing headphones. Children are cutting themselves off from the sensory experience of being in the room, even when they're with other people. So be thinking in terms of, when my child's using a device, is it isolating them or is it connecting them? Is it connecting them to people in real life? Is it connecting them to the world? Is it connecting them to the people in the room? If there's an opportunity to cast it up on maybe a television that exists in the house, so all of us can be watching, or we can have multiple players within one household. Again, devices are not inherently evil. I'm not on any sort of,
Luddite train.
Yeah. I'm practical. I know the world, I know this is 2024. However, we can use our permission and our public viewing abilities to allow kids to engage with them in a healthy way. And then the third P is private. We must keep settings for our accounts, for our profiles, private. There is no exception to this rule. We must have the highest safety settings on all gaming platforms, and we must keep our children's identity hidden or protected whenever possible. We can even have a conversation with our children about, who are you playing with? How do you know that person in real life? Let's double check that that's somebody that you know in real life. Ask them what you guys are learning in chemistry right now. Oh, ask them what the latest badge was in Scouts that you guys just earned. Let's have some, at the end of a website form or something, you have to click that you're not a robot. Guess what? I want you to ask questions of your friends online that prove they know you. And knowing somebody through somebody else is not enough.
No, and they can get so much information based off of what you've posted, who you're friends with, and really what you've posted. If you posted in your school, they can name local parks, name local restaurants. I mean, these predators can find out all kinds of information about a child, and make the child believe that they know each other, from what I've seen in the stories.
And one of the things that is pretty striking is that when we look at hands-on child sexual abuse, because grooming covers not just what's happening online, but also in person. And it has some similarities and it does have some differences. But when we think about similarities, there are 2 places where hands-on child sexual abuse occurs most of the time. Do you know what those 2 places are?
At home.
The home where the child lives.
School? No.
And the home where the predator lives.
Oh, okay.
So 82% of the time, child sexual abuse is happening in 2 places. So that means when I'm thinking about device use in my house, I'm also going to be considering, where in our house are we using these devices? Are we using them in the living room? Are we using them in the bathroom? Are we using them in the bedroom? When you think about the doors that you leave open at night, you probably close your doors. You probably also lock your doors. So having very tangible conversations with our children, especially our young females, that making content in our bathrooms and our bedrooms is sharing information. And they may say to you, Mom, I'm not telling them where I go to school. Okay, but in the background of your video, there may be posters of a favorite team. There may be pictures of you with other people. There may be uniforms or, other indicators. And again, children think through a child's mind, and we have to impart, unfortunately, if we're going to give permission for devices,
Mhm.
we have to impart certain information to our kids because we need them to be street smart.
Mhm.
Just in the same way they're street smart about crossing the street, wearing a helmet, looking both ways, wearing a seatbelt. We have to enforce some sort of parameters around what does street smart look like online. And now, unlike before, there are so many resources for parents about getting educated, getting informed, free training programs
Mhm.
for not just adults, but for adolescents and young kids, so that we don't have to have the creation of children being traumatized and experiencing grooming or child sexual abuse or exploitation, because we can see the warning signs. Those warning signs are somebody asking you to shift to another platform, somebody asking you for photographs or videos,
Mhm.
somebody asking you for your location, somebody wanting to send you things or try to get additional information about you
Mhm.
and communicate over a different format. So
Mhm.
we're going to take something from a gaming platform and then give me your cell phone number so that we can start texting, for
Mhm.
example. So a lot of parents are very good about saying, well, we've got one time a week that I check your phone. Well, guess what? If I'm a savvy teen or a savvy kid,
Yeah.
I know exactly when the time is. I can delete everything that I downloaded
Mm.
last week around this time and make sure that the phone is clean or that my profile is clean. Not to mention the fact that kids are very good about having multiple profiles. This is my public profile my parents see and that
Yep.
the people from church see, etc. And then this is the profile where I actually hang out and spend time.
Mm.
So again, unfortunately, if we're going to grant permission for devices, then we have to be intentional about not only our conversations, but our follow through, our actions,
Mhm.
because it is our responsibility to keep kids safe. Just like how we would detect grooming in person, we
Mhm.
also have to be that same level of intelligent when it comes to grooming online, because there are
Mhm.
things we can look out for and we can have that conversation with our children. And honestly, if we can't have a dialogue about risk factors and exposure to pornography and exposure to moving to a different messaging platform, then maybe we're not ready.
Ding, ding, ding. If you're not ready to manage all this in your daily life, daily conversations, checking those devices, then it may not be time yet for your child to have those devices because, one, you may set those privacy settings. I'm glad that you mentioned the private piece, but a lot of these platforms allow the child to turn off the private profiles. So you need to keep checking that they haven't adjusted the privacy settings. Some platforms like Snapchat, I'm going to rag on them again, has a My Eyes Only data vault where kids can hide content from you, the parent, which is one of the many reasons why your child shouldn't have Snapchat. But then we have to do our research on what tools in-app tools on all these platforms, but then also external tools like parental monitoring tools that we can employ on top of what is already there. So it's a lot of work, and you're right, there are resources to help us, but it is a lot of work, and our kids are going to eventually find workarounds. And so we have to stay on top of it and keep having those conversations. Popping in here to tell listeners about a resource that can help us protect our kids, and that is the Bark phone, the Bark monitoring app, and the Bark watch. Topics like grooming can be scary, I know, but there's hope for parents. We don't have to be in the dark thanks to monitoring technology by Bark. Bark looked deep into stories about grooming in order to help families avoid these traumatic experiences. With the Bark phone, you can manage what your child has access to, approve contacts, block certain sites after bedtime, and it can grow with your child, adding new features and apps as they grow, or dial it back to give them a breather. Giving your child access to phones and devices can be scary and stressful, but Bark can help alleviate that stress and allow us to focus on what's important: connecting with your child. If your child has an iPhone or an Android, please look into the Bark app to give them additional protections, and keep an eye out for the new Bark watch. Back to my conversation with Anna. how are you controlling? So when it comes to permission, like what you permit your child to have access to, what tools are you using to control not giving them permission to unsafe spaces?
Well, first and foremost, we have a lot of open conversations. We have age-appropriate conversations ad nauseum, especially according to my teens. Much to their chagrin, they do not have cell phones, which does eliminate a tremendous amount of the work. And many people might say, well, that's not practical for us. And so every family has to make their own decision about that. And we may alter that decision in the coming years. However, I've not been shown any information or research or statistics that reinforce that having a smart device in their pocket makes them safer. I completely agree that a child can have a phone, but that phone does not need to be a smart device. And I think this perception we have as a culture and a society that every child needs to be equipped with this sort of technology is a little bit of it's a bit of a ruse. And I'm maybe part of an old school parenting group, or I'm just left in old school thinking, but nothing is worth risking the safety and well-being of the sanctity of our family or my children for, especially when it comes to technology and what we know about potential predators. Because, Nikki, predators are the ones who are winning here. They're the ones who are gaining access to kids, and they're able to groom kids through all hours of the night because kids have devices in their rooms and they're up at night when parents like me are exhausted, and I'm already asleep by 11. So we have to just be very practical about our limitations as parents, as you were just talking about.
Yeah.
So in addition to limiting devices, we do limit the apps that children can go on. Time limits are a really big one. Turning off the internet has been a really useful approach in our house, and shutting those things down much earlier than their peers seems to make an enormous difference on their basic function, like sleep. You know, we're raising the next group of adults. So I want them to have full brain development. I want them to be able to get through a night of sleep. And yes, we have old school alarm clocks in our house, and it gets noisy at a certain hour in the morning with lots of things buzzing and going off. But the only people who have alarms on phones are the adults. And even my 5-year-old will walk around the house if she picks up a cell phone or something, and she'll say, phones are tools for adults, not toys for kids.
Oh my gosh.
That's the little tagline that I repeat all the time to them. And when they see me on the phone, just like you model in your communication with your audience before, this is a work tool. It's not a gaming device. It's not a play device. And this is a tool that adults need. Children don't need this tool. And unfortunately, I might be the minority on that, but I'm perfectly fine saying no to some of the norms that we find ourselves facing in 2024.
Me too. Thank you for sharing that you have teenagers without phones, and we need to normalize that because if we all do it together, if we come together as a collective society and restrict them from harmful platforms, they won't even want to be on them. The only reason they want to use these platforms is because they think everybody is, and they don't want to be left out. And so if we come together and decide that we want to keep them safe and let them be kids, we can make a big difference with that. So I appreciate you sharing that personal piece there. So you talked about how to recognize grooming behavior, and I assume you would recommend communicating that with the child on what to look out for if they are active on these platforms.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We must boldly, routinely, clearly tell kids, if anybody ever asks to communicate with you on a different platform, if anybody sends you direct messaging, so many of these games now are like a cheat sheet for potential predators. If I'm looking for a girl of a certain age, I might go to a Hello Kitty game. If I'm looking for a boy of a certain age, I might go to a car game or a war game. So we're handing out a very easy tool for potential predators to find minors at their ideal age and their ideal gender. So we have to begin there.
Okay.
What we also have to do is we have to have clear conversations with kids. Nobody should be direct messaging you on any sort of profile. If they're direct messaging you about the content that's happening on the game, as long as that is staying age appropriate, when we think about things like bad language, remember what we spoke about before, that idea of forbidden fruits, that I'm going to dangle something in front of you that I know your parents would otherwise say no to. That can begin to happen even with the way that we speak to each other online and through these platforms. So I would be alerting my kids to things like, if anybody's ever, bringing in this type of language, if anybody ever talks about anything sexual, on average, it takes less than 3 minutes. In under 3 minutes, the conversations with potential predators discussing sex. That's the timeline. So when we think about the amount of time that kids are on gaming devices, let's say in our house, the rule is you have 30 minutes. Well, 30 minutes, if the conversations get sexual in under 3 minutes, boy, oh boy, we have a lot of work to do. In less than 18 minutes, the average predator is setting up a physical meeting with a child. So we have to be tuned in to the fact that that individual wants to isolate you. We can teach kids about isolation. They know about isolation. They know about isolation through normal friend relationships. They know about isolation when it comes to dynamics maybe in the household, hopefully not, but maybe in the household or in the neighborhood. So that's not a new concept, and it shouldn't be a scary concept. And we should describe it in such a way that makes sense. Like, anybody who wants to take you off of spending time connecting with your friends playing this game, that's a red flag. Let me know about that. Anybody who wants to take you off of the game and chat with you in a different place. Anybody who wants to know where you live, know what your phone number is, know where you go to school, any additional information. And then an enormous red flag is anyone who wants you to send them photographs or videos.
So a theme here is taking your child off of the more public gaming platform or even social media to chat on an encrypted platform. I would assume like WhatsApp, Telegram, even iMessage is a more hidden spot for them. So, and again, we'll include a list of the platforms that you should look out for. But if it's end-to-end encrypted, I would just recommend blocking it from being able to be downloaded on your child's device. Especially WhatsApp, Telegram. You can't really control iMessage on an iPhone. You can choose a safer device though. Okay, if a parent has a child who's active on social media or gaming, is there some things we can look out for to recognize if our child has been in a grooming situation? So any red flags we can keep an eye on?
Well, being as we're living in the house with the child, we have a front row seat to their behavior. We're going to be paying attention for sudden changes in behavior, such as sudden changes in hygiene, sudden changes in dress. We're going to be looking for sudden defensiveness or secretiveness around their behavior, their comings and goings, and around that device. Normally when I would take the device from Johnny for our normal Sunday check-in, now suddenly he's hiding the device and he won't let me check it for pictures and direct messaging, etc. So secretiveness and defensiveness around devices. We're also going to be looking out for any regressive behaviors, like now I need to sleep with the light on in the hallway. I need to sleep in mom and dad's room. I can't sleep by myself. Any bedwetting, any thumb sucking. We're also going to be looking out for some hypersexual behavior. So if there are promiscuous tendencies when it comes to relationships with similarly aged children, or behaviors online that you think are uncharacteristic, like posting more pictures. Maybe those pictures that are being posted become a little bit more seductive, or, I hate to even say that word, Nikki, because children don't understand the sense of the nuance that goes into intimate relationships until older adolescence and adulthood. So, the idea that we can even imprint seduction on a child is distorted for me to even say. And I don't want to convey that is the intent of the child. But when we're thinking about the material that they are posting or liking or following, if those are moving or trending in a direction that is age inappropriate or more sexualized in nature, those would be some enormous red flags that we could look out for.
Okay. Thank you. And I would add, when you're checking their social media, not just checking the photos that they're posting or the content that they're posting, but checking what's being served to them, checking their search history to see what they're seeking out and what the platform is serving to them can give you some interesting insight into what they're absorbing and what their experience is like there.
And in no other space in their life do we let an AI dial up who they should be in contact with, right? Like, just how preposterous is this that an algorithm is going to decide who my child should get introduced to?
Well, and more than 50% of the content that they're seeing in the algorithm is nothing that they're following or have shown interest in. So it's all these other things that the platform is deciding that our kids should see. And we know that what is served up more often than not is something that's sticky or makes them feel uncomfortable, something that makes them feel bad, like the things that you don't want them engaging with, which to me is like, why are they on there at all? We need to ban it for kids entirely.
Well, and I think you've just raised a really important point. If I could just expand on it for a second, because I know we're closing in, but that sense that checking in with the child about how do you feel, when I educate people about grooming in real life, it's about how do you feel when Uncle Tom comes over? How do you feel when you go over to the daycare center? How do you feel when this person babysits?
Yeah.
We could be having that same conversation with kids when they're online. How does it feel when you engage with social media, live
How do you feel?
platforms?
Right. Yeah.
How does it feel in your body? How does it feel? Do your guts feel strange? Does your heart feel strange? Does your head feel strange? And then explore that out loud.
I love that. Okay, last thing before we close out. If I find out my child has been groomed or is actively being groomed, what do I do?
Report it.
Okay.
Report it. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a cyber tip line. They receive over 25 million reports of child sexual exploitation a year on average, and it continues to rise. However, NCMEC, which is what it's called, is not an official authority. So what it does is it relays that information to the local authorities where you live.
Great.
So your best bet, in addition to reporting it to national reporting clearinghouses like the cybertipline.org, is to take the device to your local law enforcement. Because the catch is, what we have to do is we have to find these individuals and we have to prosecute them. And so many people believe this is almost a victimless crime, which Nikki, you and I don't believe and don't agree with.
Right.
However, we must follow up with reporting, and then there could be further investigation that you can really be paramount in moving the needle when it comes to finding justice for the victims or the children involved in this case. So in several cases, there are law enforcement who might even bait the person into more conversation so that they have more to go on to build that case. Because these cases can often be elusive, even the ones that do get reported, which is often less than 20% that ever get reported to the websites who host these individuals together, or the police. Police often get less than 15% of the total child exploitation that's happening online.
And I know that a lot of parents will say, well, my kid doesn't want to make a bigger deal out of this. They don't want anyone to know. This predator is probably grooming multiple children. And so by you reporting them, you're protecting other kids, right? And that's the key, I think.
Bingo. So 70% of the time, sexual predators have up to 9 victims. I think that is skewed on the lower end, especially when we think about predators who are using online platforms to gain access and space with children. So I would say to all those parents who are afraid to get involved, let's put this in terms of a hands-on crime in real life. If you knew that your neighbor was abusing a child who lived down the street, and you caught wind of it or had suspicions of it, you might say to yourself, oh, no. I'm not going to get involved. This has nothing to do with me. This isn't about my child. This isn't my problem. Now, what we know is that if that individual got reported, the likelihood of the behavior stopping, the survivor getting justice, that increases.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we stay silent, predators win.
Right.
Communities remain at risk and children continue to be harmed. So what if the child before your child who was getting groomed had reported it? That would have made a remarkable difference for everybody involved.
Okay. Report to NCMEC, to the platform. You know, and NCMEC will push it
To
through
local
to local
police.
So you should also report to local police in addition to NCMEC pushing it down to them as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, so there was so much we covered there. And in 2022, you wrote a book called Duck Duck Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target. So can you tell listeners where they can get a copy of that and anything else that you want to share about where to reach you?
Sure. So Duck Duck Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target is on Amazon, and there's also an audiobook version for people who prefer that modality. You can go to my website, annasonoda.com, and if anybody needs information or resources, I'm more than happy to provide those to you, Nikki, for additional resources in your show notes. And I would just remind parents that we can do this. You know, there were risk factors when we were growing up that our parents thought, oh my gosh, you know, we'll never be able to take on these issues. And we got through our childhoods. We have made it to adulthood, and we can and will do the same for our own children. And just remember that grooming is an intentional, incremental process, and it's observable. So if we know what to look for, we can interrupt it. We can protect our kids, and we can protect other people's kids as well.
Anna, thank you so much. Your work is difficult, I assume, but so important. This topic is something that parents, like I said, I think we try to stay away from it, but we can't do that. We have to face it head on and prepare our children and protect them. So thank you for all of the insight and actionable resources that you provided. And let's have follow-on conversations because there's so much more. We went all over the place today, but I feel like we could focus in on some specific topics in the future. So Anna, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nikki, for having me.
Thank you.